Welcome back to 100 Lies the God Culture teaches about the Philippines. Today's lie concerns Tim's claim that an old Spanish document maps the way to Ophir and ends in the Philippines. As we shall see, that is simply not true in the slightest. Tim makes this claim in his videos.
In about 1519 or so, even before Magellan landed in the Philippines, the Spanish created a map in a Spanish government document number 98. And it actually maps it all the way through. We have this in our source book. You can read it. We actually give it to you in Spanish. And we show you how to read it in Spanish. So you can read the original and you can see that they're leading you specifically to the Philippines as Ophir and Tarshish on a map. Wow. GMA mapped it in that interview that we showed in one of the last segments. And this is their mapping, so we're using that. And you can see that Ophir and Tarshish, the end of this whole route, is the Philippines. This isn't a mystery. This has always been the case.
Tim claims GMA mapped out this route as if they are affirming his fake history, but that is not the case.
Ang Colección General de Documentos Relativos a las Islas Filipinas o General Collection of Documents relating to the Philippine Islands.
The navigational guide nung sila po'y nagsimulang maglayag started from the Cape of Good Hope in Africa to India, to Burma, Sumatra, Moluccas, Borneo, Sulu, to China. Then, finally, sa tapat daw ng China ay pulong-pulong mga isla.
They are simply illustrating a speech given by Representative Dan Fernandez. But with the GMA seal, Tim can strut and pretend that a news organization has legitimized his lies about the Philippines. He also makes the same claim about document 98 in his book The Search for King Solomon's Treasure.
In fact, the Spanish even record directions from Spain east to Ophir or Lequias, which it specifically equates affirming Magellan's notes, and Tarshish. In Collection General de Documentos Documento 98, detailed directions are provided over many pages from Spain, passing Africa, then India and Sri Lanka, to Burma, to Sumatra, to Moluccas, to China, then finally to Tarsus and then Lequias and Ophir, Philippines.
Tim's comments on document 98 in his source book are interesting.
Note, this whole chapter progresses from Spain to Lequias and Ophir. Not a perfect translation, but one can easily understand this is identifying the Philippines. It is not Japan, which 149 clarifies. Taiwan is not a group of isles. This is the Philippines, especially since Pigafetta and others found the Lequias in Luzon, Philippines.
Tim's claim that this document gives directions to the Philippines rests on his misidentification of the Lequias Islands with the Philippines. I have explored that issue in depth elsewhere. You can watch the video here. His reference to 149 is to his source, which is number 149. This source is another document from volume 5 of the Collection General de Documentos discussing the importance of document 98. Here is what it says in full.
Of undeniable importance is document number 98, entitled Geographical Description from the Cape of Good Hope to China, and whose original heading reads as follows. These are the places and ports and main islands that there are from the Cape of Good Hope to the Lequias, which is what has so far been discovered the most and of which there is the most news in Portugal. It is unsigned and undated, but there is no doubt, from what can be deduced from some sentences in the text, that this notable work was due to someone who, knowing what the Portuguese had until then written and reported verbally about their expeditions in that part of the world that belonged to them, managed to condense this sum of geographical knowledge into a few sheets. The collector has assigned it the date 1520 to 1528, we believe, based on the place that this precious manuscript occupies in the file of which it is a part, but in our opinion it must have been written before 1522. It describes with some detail the Asian coast from the part washed by the waters of the Red Sea to the beginning of the Chinese coast. It gives information on all the kingdoms that were more or less known at that time, as well as the islands of Ceylon, both Java, Moluccas, Celebes, Banda and others, up to Jalalo. From here it turns to the mainland of Asia, not without alluding to Borneo, and concludes with a vague allusion to Japan, or Lequias, as it was called then. There is not the slightest concrete allusion to the Philippine archipelago, although the author mentions groups of islands situated at a short distance from it. This persuades us that the work we are dealing with was written before the year 1522, when the ship Victoria arrived in Spain after having sailed around the world. In that same year, the Portuguese captured the ship Trinidad in the Moluccas, which, like the Victoria, was part of Magellan's fleet. The Portuguese seized the logbooks and all the documents carried by the crew of the Trinidad, and it is reasonable to assume that the following year, 1523, such precious manuscripts were already in Portugal. For these reasons, we repeat, we believe that this remarkable description must have been written before 1522.
The compilers of these documents says that document 98 could not have been written before 1522 because there is no mention of the Philippines and the document is about Portuguese discoveries. Now, it is a fact of history that Portugal did not discover the Philippines. Why would they mention those islands? They wouldn't. Tim comments on this denial thusly.
Note, in other words, don't pay attention to conclusions of authors or historians who draw from antiquated information as this identifies. That is so 1521 we are now beyond 1521's find by Magellan. Why is this document from the Spanish so adamant about this being the thinking before 1522? Because Magellan found the Lequias again documented by Pigafetta and others following was Luzon Island Philippines is fully confirmed, not Japan or Taiwan, who are proven false. To think otherwise is simply a false paradigm of willing ignorance. Of largest note, that outthinking ignored the Philippines, which you can find in British writings, especially even today. We find it in Mill, Suarez and other authors whom we even quote as well, which is why we do as this Spanish document suggests. We ignore their antiquated paradigm of biasing conclusions which they clearly have on this document condemned in this writing as well, and characterizing it as stuck in an old paradigm. The Lequias are not a scholarly mystery, as you will find many who cite one quote after another and maps but all before Magellan and then actually use those in drawing a conclusion, ignoring Magellan, Pigafetta and many others, and ignoring the Philippines. Why is it that the Philippines must be ignored? Well, in reading this entire book, that reason is obvious. It is the only option as Ophir, as there is no other, and we are not supposed to know this.
Tim simply brushes it off, saying it's a false paradigm and hinting that the true location of Ophir as being the Philippines is being covered up. That is nonsense. Document 98 is not a list of Spanish discoveries. Once again, the subtitle of this document is,
"These are the places and ports and the main islands that exist from the Cape of Good Hope to the Lequias, which is what has been discovered the most so far and what is most known in Portugal."
Portugal did not discover the Philippines. The Spanish were the first Europeans to set eyes on the archipelago. It would not make sense for the Philippines to be included in a list of Portuguese discoveries until after 1522, which is when documents from the captured Trinidad would have made their way back to Portugal. Tim simply ignores documented history for his own fabricated lies. No one in the history of the world has ever claimed the Lequias Islands were the Philippines until Tim came along. There is no map that shows this identification. The Lequias Islands are in between Taiwan and Japan and today are known as the UQ Islands. A true mapping of the directions in document 98 looks like this. This is a 1569 Mercator map. The Lequias Islands are clearly separate from the Philippines. The claim that document 98 leads to the Philippines is false. It is simply one more lie taught about the Philippines by Timothy J. Schwab, who is the God Culture.